We are recording. It is November 5 in the US anyways, and we've got a good agenda. Please, if you're on this call, if you don't mind adding your list to the set of attendees here, maybe someone can drop a link to the agenda in chat for anyone who might have missed it. But this helps us keep track of what meeting times are working for people. We haven't actually explicitly called this out, but I would say our usual online meeting next week is for sure canceled because I think all may be at KubeCon, and we'll be trying to have lots of meetings there. So yeah, but in person. And unfortunately, previous experience at KubeCon is that the meetings are very hard to translate to online for online participants because we're usually in a crowded, noisy environment. But if we can find some space that works for online, we'll try and make some time available that way too. But yeah, thank you to whoever is mentioning that next week's meeting is canceled. In lieu of next week's meeting, if you happen to be able to make it to KubeCon, we got a lot of things going on next week. So I think Nick mentioned in chat when we were trying to find slots for us to talk about things that there's basically Gateway API talks or related talks. It seems like most of the slots at KubeCon this time. So congrats everyone on getting talks in, but also that makes it real painful to find times. There are still, I think, Nikki, Flynn, you're on the hook for picking some other times at random to meet. I added this handy little map now that it's on here, but basically, whenever you get to the conference center, we're looking for the Ambassador and Maintainer Lounge for our meetups, and that's this thing right here. Hopefully, it'll make sense when we get there. We'll find out. But yeah, these are the topics we're thinking about. If you see other topics and you say, hey, I bet a group of people would be interested in talking about X or Y or whatever, add it to the list and we'll see. And maybe while we're here, if there's anything that isn't covered that you think should be, maybe feel free to say so now. No pressure. Okay, cool. Well, looking forward to seeing anyone who can make it to KubeCon next week. I'll be on Slack still. That's probably the easiest way to figure out where I am. If you want to meet up, always
same for me.
Meet people that see. Yeah, so cool.
Not only will I be on Slack, I'll even have Slack turned on.
Yeah. Another little detail here is Mattia is running a Gateway API survey. Which actually that links to Slack. So yeah, that's not
yeah, basically thanks to everybody who provided their feedback, and the surveys is live. We already have some responses, and yeah, if you host a Gateway API talk and if you want to help spreading it, we really appreciate. And yeah, in the Slack discussion, there is also a QR code that you can use if you want.
Can you, actually, any of us can download that. We should put that someplace other than Slack where it will get deleted.
Oh yeah, that's a good call. Yeah, even if you want to drop it in to this
actually, let me just copy it into the
doc. Perfect.
Yeah.
All my talks are on Friday, so I'm not gonna. I'll post them, but I'm not very. Me trying to refer to anyone else's talk is not going to be very helpful. But I can at least do the survey.
Yeah, the Gateway API talks. Well, like mine are on Thursday, which is a little odd.
Yeah,
it feels like they did stack some of these late in the conference.
Yeah. Okay. The next one, I wanted to raise this before 8:30 because I know some people need to drop. This is not something like I expect a solution for. This is more just FYI and something like I'm interested in talking more about at KubeCon. We've kind of gone around this topic for a few times and never really reached a solution. And I don't think we ever wrote it out in quite this much detail before. But basically, in my opinion, our TLS config on Gateway is somewhere between confusing and dangerous, depending on your perspective. And I would like to see it improved. This is really just trying to get everyone to agree that there's a problem. If you scroll down here, I am not proposing any solutions today. I am just trying to get some agreement on the problem statement, right? So this, in fairness, I am not the sole author of this doc. I got some good feedback from some of the LB folks that are focused on TLS inside Google, and they have been very good at telling me that what we've done or what I've done is maybe not the best. So this is coming back to why what we've done is confusing and not particularly great. So for those familiar with how Gateway works today, we have this host name field and listener. So foo.example.com, which when it's an HTTPS listener is supposed to match both SNI and host header. And in practice, when you get connection coalescing, that is unlikely to actually be feasible. So for example,
specifically, you would usually end up with the host name matching, but the SNI not. Do I remember that direction correctly?
Potentially. So what happens here is, there's a few variables at play. So first I'm going to focus on this config, but the other gnarly one is the certificate itself. That's probably the key thing here. So if you have a certificate that has a wildcard, so in this example, I've got fooexample.com, and this has a SAN for just foo.example.com. And then I have a wildcard that's basically a superset of that, star.example.com. You basically are saying, well, always choose the most specific thing, and if not, fall back to this. And we really want to have this work because it seems like it'd be a great UX. Problem with connection coalescing is once you've had a connection negotiated for star.example.com, if that client wants to send a request to foo.example.com, it's going to come through this listener whether you like it or not. It's gonna reuse this cert. You could send a 421 response. We've talked about that. Many clients, or at least some clients, don't know how to handle a 421. So there are other issues we can talk about with 421s. There are other things we could potentially do here. I don't want to focus too much on potential solutions, but this is a problem. And where this gets even worse, I kind of called this out, is Arco has a gap. This is no fault of Arco, that we do client cert validation on the gateway listener. So you can imagine that if I said, okay, I'm going to say anything going to foo.example.com needs to provide me a client cert that matches this criteria, and then it just bypasses that entirely, you've got a bad day where you found a way, your client has found a way to bypass your client cert and get to your listener anyway. I'm not proposing any solutions at this point. I'm open to ideas for solutions. I have some ideas of my own, but I think that turns into a bigger conversation. But I just wanted to give a very high level overview of this doc. I know we have many bigger topics to get to today, but just wanted to run through this at a high level. Any high level thoughts before we move on? Yeah, Arco?
Yeah, for the first part, Rob, I feel like it's an implementation detail, and implementation should be, making sure they're doing the right thing. I'm not sure how it can be solved at the gateway API level. For the first example you mentioned, where The first request gets validated by the second listener, and although it's the next one is a specific match and should go to the first listener, it ends up going to the second listener due to connection coalescing. That feels like an implementation problem that needs to be solved at an implementation level using, let's say, a 4-to-1 or something that you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I agree this is at the heart of it an implementation problem. I don't know that there's a good solution available for most implementations. And so I think what's happening today is most implementations are just not handling this well. And we have no conformance tests to cover this, which makes me particularly nervous.
It's okay. We
And-
can just rewire the entire internet to do what we think is right.
Yeah, it should be fine. Candace?
Even though Arco already said that this is probably an implementation specific solution, why would implementations just not coalesce connections that have different certificates specifications?
Sadly, this is up to clients, and clients do all the fun in the world, and we just have to deal with it on our side.
Okay.
So
Yeah. So you
I'd phrase
can't.
that a little. I'd phrase that a little more strongly. Anything we can think of that a client could possibly do is going to happen, especially if we don't think it's a good idea.
well said.
And secondarily, does this kind of discussion belong with the gateway merging and listener merging?
Yeah, I mean,
document?
I hate to make that document even more complicated because it's already very complicated. But ultimately, this is about what our TLS config looks like on Gateway API and on Gateway in particular. And if there's a more suitable path for this, right? There's variations here. I don't want to get too far into solutions, but some, I think variations are finding a solution that most implementations could determine as workable, or making some form of API change that would be easier for implementations to support. Those are just broad categories. I'm not saying we do either one, but yeah.
So the problems are related but not connected necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, if we do decide that if we made, API change foo or, some API change, they become very related, right? Because what we're discussing in the merging hierarchy, et cetera, is basically some refactoring to where even TLS config lives fundamentally. It wasn't a huge move, but it was still like, oh, we can have 2 layers of TLS config. And so that definitely it becomes related to this.
It's one of the many reasons why the gateway merging discussion hasn't moved forward much, is because we've got a lot of interrelated topics that are very hard to explain. And so this is Rob sort of trying to explain this problem a little bit more. And again, like this is one of those ones where it kind of sucks because like this is one time where we've actually tried to do the thing that is the best experience for users, and it's created a problem. The other thing I think is very relevant to mention here is that this problem would be exponentially worse if we still had the behavior where you could specify TLS certs on HTTP route, which people have asked for to come back. This is one of many reasons why we decided not to do that. There is someone has done us a favor and opened a question saying why can't we specify TLS details at a HTTP route level, which I am planning to respond to, but with all of the KubeCon stuff I have not got to yet. So if you're watching this right now, or you're watching the recording of this person who logged that, it is not forgotten. It's definitely something I want to respond to, but like it's I've got to like You need a measured response, and I am currently not capable of providing that with the amount of bandwidth I have.
Yeah. I mean, that is a good reminder. I should at least find some time to link to this doc. That's not a perfect answer, but it is related, as you mentioned. So
It's a helpful answer, certainly. I think it's particularly helpful, Rob, to, wow, how do I phrase this one? There's a really nasty subtlety here that I think often gets missed, which is that the certificate must be negotiated when the connection starts. But then there could be multiple requests coming down. And man, it's really, really difficult to be thinking of a scenario in which it's unambiguously a good thing for a client to do connection coalescing in a way that breaks this. But of course, they will, whether we think it's a good thing or not. So that's
But also, I mean, some
yeah.
some implementations, serving a certificate that that handles more than one SNI, and specifically wanting to sort of have the connection coalescing work in the way that it can work in this case. One of the uses for that is domain fronting, where you terminate TLS for a big set of domains and you front those domains, like for a CDN or something like that. And so some people who are doing like CDN like things, they want to be able to domain front. But for most of the people who Gateway API is originally designed for, they do not want to be able to domain front. Absolutely do not. And so like there's a strong tension there.
So I want to time check because this is a big
let's leave
agenda
this alone
today.
now. Agreed. Yeah.
But what I will say is I'm going to add another item to the set of break room sessions. If you're at KubeCon and if this is something you're interested in, I want to talk more about it. So I'll add a session here, and we can go from there. I do want to call out, we have some big items later in the list. We have some updates on Instance Gateway, that's the LLM routing stuff, and we have some updates on Ingress Nginx. I think both of those are going to take probably 10 minutes apiece, so that doesn't leave a lot of time for what's left. So we'll just try and run through this as quickly as we can. Candace, you wanted to bring up, we already briefly mentioned this, but anything specific about the hierarchy doc?
It's the wrong time to bring it up since KubeCon is coming up, but I just wanted to make sure that this isn't dropped as we go. And maybe your choice to separate the connection coalescing and listener isolation into a separate document is good, and we should break down the gateway hierarchy brainstorming document into smaller pieces as well.
Yeah, I think that's, so there's already a session for listener sets and merging, which I think is a subset of that. And then I think I'll have a separate one for TLS. One thing I'll say, I don't know if we can record these, but at the very least, we're going to try and take notes for every discussion just so that it's easy to capture if you're not able to make it to KubeCon.
Yeah, I can't make it, but wish you guys all the best there, and hopefully
thank you.
I can catch up with it.
Yeah, and I don't think KubeCon is going to be these like absolute, we're going to make this decision and that decision. It's going to be just, can we move forward in our understanding of these areas so that we're better equipped to make decisions? But that's all.
I'll call it a win if we can get through all of it without coming to blows over any of these things.
Perfect.
Okay, I'm all set then to move on.
Great, thanks. Shane, I don't know if Shane's on this call.
I'm here. I voted. I was a little
sweet.
late because I was voting. I'll go really quick because we do have some big topics. Thank you. So this is just a continual reminder that the CFP for KubeCon London is open and closes very soon after Salt Lake next week. So please don't forget, if you want to put in a proposal there, it is kind of a tight window. That's the link and should get you to where you need to go. And on a second note, for those of you who don't know, there was a project, it's called Blixt. It's in Kubernetes SIGs that kind of grew out of the Gateway API. At this point, It was at one point kind of conceived as maybe a tool we could use for integration testing in Gateway API, mostly for L4. It's an L4 load balancer. And at this point, the project has kind of decided to move away from that in favor of more exploratory things with networking, mainly because TCP route and UDP route are stagnant. So there's a chance that we would kind of come back to it, but we've explicitly taken it out of the goals for now to be that integration testing tool and focusing more on exploratory networking things. So if you're interested in that, there's a link. Otherwise, just wanted to give people a heads up, since we have generally given updates about Blixt in this meeting. There may be just less of them in general because we're kind of not really as connected to Gateway API as we once were. And then somebody added a note to my note.
That would be me. Just
Yep.
as a point of interest, as y'all will hear at KubeCon, Linkerd is using TCP route for some stuff. So,
yeah, if somebody comes along and champions TCP route and UDP route forward, we will likely come back. And we, the Blix project, will likely come back. We're still going to support UDP route and TCP route. It's just not going to be our main focus for the moment.
Yeah, I should probably have put my name on that, actually.
It's okay. I figured it was you when I saw Linkerd. So if anybody has any questions about that, please raise your hand real quick. Otherwise, we'll keep flying on by because we have some bigger topics coming up. Going once. Going twice.
Cool.
Sold.
Sounds good. All right, Kellen, I think I see you on the call. Thank you for hopping on. We had gotten some questions about what on earth is going on with Instance Gateway, and Kellen has been leading a lot of those efforts and has graciously agreed to give a bit of an update of what's happening for just the very high level. This is adding some new API surface from working group serving direction that is meant to be compatible with Gateway API, and we're already getting some Gateway implementations that are working on implementing this. So just hand it off to Kellen.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Rob. So I am not sure where everyone is at, so I'm going to try to do a crash course of the why. Go ahead.
One thing, I don't know if you have anything to present, but you can share your screen if you want. I can.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I was just going to show the proposal we made. Cool. So we see this here. So I'm just going to leave it on this image because graphics are always nice. I'm not going to make anybody read a doc, especially not in a screen share. But just to generally go over why we even started this. As many of you know, LLMs are big, expensive, and they're highly specialized. So without LoRa, an LLM, a model server can only serve a single specialized use case that's been fine-tuned. Whether your traffic is 100 QPS or 3, it takes the entire model server for just that one use case. So even on low traffic times, it's just sitting there being very expensive. LoRa has come along, which is a fine-tuning method, which is lightweight, and there is a tech called multi-LoRa that lets you have multiple fine-tunes work on a single model server. So you're kind of creating more density for your use cases. So hopefully during low traffic periods for some of your other use cases, it's high traffic periods. So your very expensive accelerator is working for you rather than just sitting there. With that, however, we find that each LLM pod, and I kind of try to show this with these adapters highlighted here, each one has a unique state, which is a little different than a standard HTTP service where we expect each server to be stateless and you can throw a request to any one of them and it should work fine. And it is true that it would work fine, but there is more efficiencies if we are more intelligent about how we are routing, specifically around LoRa affinity or KV cache utilization, things like that. So we do some specific routing that is not currently in Gateway. I know there are long-term things to do so, and Rob can talk about that, but we do rely on the specific model that the request has. So between the model that's coming in and the state of our, we'll just use VLLM for now, our VLLM pool, we can intelligently decide where to put this request to have the best performance for all of your services that are trying to work in this pool, as well as, you know, the specific adapter it's asking for. If it's already loaded there, we can start it in a batch right away rather than putting it in a queue on another model server. Let's say model server C versus going to model server A. So that is why we need to do that. We're also doing some body-based routing. So we want to be very intentional on the requests we are cracking open the body for, because you all know better than I that opening up a body for routing is going to be expensive. And then for the API surface, we have a proposal here, and I can link this specifically into the doc after I'm done sharing. But we generally have two main CRDs that we care about. I'll start with the LLM server pool. This one's going to be very simple. This LLM server pool is the aggregator of your model servers. And that is defining, okay, I want these model servers to work together for what we consider a shared base model to then serve for your LLM service, which is going to be your specific use case. We have it here. Sorry. So LLM services fill up these server pools to then be served for all their different use cases. So we are kind of, and it is a very loose metaphor of like a hypervisor, where we're trying to treat our model server as a VM and our LLM services, our model server as a host and LLM services as VMs, excuse me. So that is how we're trying to split this up. Now, how does this work with Gateway currently? I can go back to my image here, where we show that we have Envoy Gateway, or frankly, any gateway that supports XProc. And what we have done, and I've worked with Arco some on this, and I really appreciate his input, we are patching the XDS config explicitly to wire up the listeners to listen for XProc to only listen on the HTTP routes we have. Eventually, we want to work with the different gateway controllers to implement it so that they're wiring it up for the backend ref of the LLM server pool is what we're currently working with. So when an LLM server pool is set as the backend, we will then wire up the XProc so we're not just sniffing the body for all requests that come through the gateway. Crash course, I probably missed a ton of things. I assume there's a ton of questions. Please.
Yeah, no, that's a great overview. I will open it up for questions real soon. Just one thing for gateway implementers, which I know there's several on this call. What this effectively means is there's a new kind of backend. So an alternative to service, which is LLM aware. And what basically that means is it's this LLM server pool. And when you specify that kind of backend, you get along with it kind of magically via XProc or some extension mechanism of your choice, something that's going to do better at endpoint selection. So if you think that most implementations today are doing, say round robin or something for, you route to the service and then it's round robin-ish beyond that. This is, I'm going to choose a very specific endpoint from that list based on which adapter I think is currently loaded. And that's that extension that is owned by, I think that specific extension is what would be called Instance Gateway. Is that fair, Kellen? Or part of it? I don't know.
Right. That's going to be the core of what is the LLM gateway, is that we're referring it to the endpoint picker right now.
Yeah.
To clarify, it sounded like, at least in some situations, the endpoint picker has to look into the body of the request to pick an endpoint. Did I understand that correctly?
For all of them currently.
Okay.
Yeah, it's awful. The OpenAI.
It's actually sufficiently awful that I find myself wondering, like, there's no way to hand back something after the first request that prevents you from needing to do that for subsequent requests.
Yeah.
Part of the reason, or as Arco points out, the model field lives in the body. Okay, can we move it into a header?
That was
I'm picking on this. I'm picking harder on this because it breaks it breaks a thing that has been used a lot in the Ingress world of not giving random external processors access to the body. And the fact that Envoy added extproc, I mean, okay, I get it. There was a need, but it scares the bejesus out of me in a lot of ways. And yeah, is there no way we can shift this around so that we don't have to do this very, very scary, expensive thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we will encourage users to set this in a header, but the reality is that OpenAI in particular, everyone has converged around its spec, and its spec is model is in request body. And so
but that's okay. We can
always
just
be
go
there.
sit down with them and they'll be
Yeah.
rational and listen to us and change their world, I'm sure.
Surely.
Yeah. I mean, you joke, but a few of us may have a slightly closer connection to them.
I was mostly joking. Let me phrase that differently. The joke was not so much about whether OpenAPI would listen to anyone. The joke was how difficult it would be to change all the clients in the world. So even if OpenAI decide to change tomorrow, which would be wonderful, then there's going to be a period of transition. But, if it is a thing that we could start poking them about, I would feel a lot better, certainly.
Well, and
Shane has a time check, by the way.
Yeah, just real quick. I don't want to chew up too much of you guys' time, but yeah, just as a thought experiment, I mean, Instance Gateway could be like a version checker essentially. If you don't pass model in the header, it don't work. But yeah, it's definitely one of the first things we thought about. That is tough.
Yeah.
Let's leave some links for WG serving so that people who are interested in this can join the meetings and get more connected with that. Because I think this is the first a lot of people are really starting to get more connected with it in the Gateway API group. So I'll put some of those in here.
Yeah, I guess one other. Sorry, go ahead.
No, just a shameless plug here. There is a LLM routing session for those who are interested, also at KubeCon, if you want to be part of the discussion. So I've reached out to try and include some folks from working group serving, and hopefully any Gateway folks that are interested can also jump in as well, and we'll see where it goes. Sorry, Flynn, I cut you off, I think.
Honestly, I kind of wonder if there's a place here for an adapter workload that would read the, temporarily read the model out of the body, stuff it into a header, and then hand it on to the router.
Yeah, there may be some work on that as well in parallel. So yeah.
It's I don't want to understate the extent to which extproc messing with the body is deeply, deeply disconcerting to me for a lot of reasons. But yeah, obviously this is something of a personal problem. I've realized that as well.
I completely get it. It is not efficient. It is not. It has many flaws.
I would definitely, for me though, I would summarize this as like, the real thing that we're doing here. It's not that all of what this proposal is talking about are things that you theoretically could do with a lot of like HTTP routing config. But this is effectively syntactic sugar to make this easier for this very specific use case, which I think is fine. And one of the reasons why we made it so that the backend ref is small, right? Like so that you can do exactly this sort of thing.
As a use case for Gateway API and for extending Gateway API, I think it's very cool. If we start adding lots of these special use case things into the Gateway API spec itself, I wonder a little bit about the snowball effect and where it all ends.
Yeah, what I would say specifically about this is, like Nick said, there's definitely some aspect of that there's syntactic sugar here. There is also what I would say a very significant reliance on a feedback loop. because this endpoint picker component thing needs to understand where an adapter is actively loaded to make, you're basically trying to minimize swaps, and that's very difficult to do with any, just pure routing config. You need some awareness of where
it's sticky sessions on steroids, right? Like it's the same sort of, but like, yeah. So that's what I mean by like, it's not all of the individual bits that we have that are part of this we've talked about before. But like this is like putting all of them together for this to help like make this specific use case really sing. And like it is awesome that this is happening. It is great that folks are doing work on this. Should this be part of Core Gateway API? Like, I don't think so, right? Like it's completely fair for this to live as, part of the W serving thing, and it doesn't need to be part of Gateway API, right? Like it does not need to be part of Gateway API. Yeah, so I think we should be very clear on that, right? Like WG serving can do whatever they like, and they can use Gateway API in the same way that any implementation can add extension refs and extension ref types and use Gateway API and just not be conformant, right? Like, but the WG serving, if they want there to be conformance and stuff, then that's when the discussion will be more interesting. But I think that's always a way. So anyway, I don't want to.
Yeah, I think this could open a rabbit hole. What I would say is, I view this conceptually similar to service import, where Gateway API does not own service import or multi-cluster APIs, but it does define how to interact with it. And I would argue that's roughly the same thing here, where there's a different SIG that technically owns the thing, but it very clearly is defined how it interacts. That's all. Cool. Well, yeah, time check, because we've got a bunch of things and running out of time. So Flynn, real quick, or no, I guess I added this. There's a blog post for 1.2 reviews, please. That's it. Flynn is the person who actually owns this blog post. Thank you. We're hoping to get it out this week. If the website folks will let us, it will go out this week. That's all I'll say.
That's a larger if than one might normally think in this kind of context, but reviews would be wonderful. There are a number of things in this blog post that include examples and talk about sort of details of things that got added. And with the notable exception of backend TLS policy, pretty much all of these are places where what is written down is me personally going, oh, I think this is what this does. And if you worked on one of these features, you should please double check me, because I might have gotten it wrong.
Yep.
It's added to my review queue.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks. And then real quick, Mattia, if you have a couple minutes on this.
Yeah, I guess we can skip this one, as the other one is way more important. Okay,
well, we'll just switch. We'll swap the order. I don't know how long the second will take. And so then we'll leave it over to James, Marco, Ricardo. Thank you all for joining, by the way.
Thanks for having us.
I don't know which one of you wants to take this.
I'll go ahead and kick us off, and we'll see where the conversation takes us. So we've been talking a lot as Ingress Nginx maintainers. I think for the past 2 years, folks have been asking us to implement Gateway API. We have been, if anyone's been following the project, we've been working a lot on security fixes and just trying to button things up. We've been discussing and aiming for a new implementation with the SIG networking team, and it was part of the discussion that we should bring this to the Gateway API team, because we want to, as a fresh start with Gateway API, to put this, it's been kind of workshopped and discussed that we would put this in a new repo underneath the Kubernetes SIGs. The implementation will be developed completely as a new entity, new code base and goals. We do not want this to be considered a reference implementation or the default one, and it will be very tightly scoped. When we say tightly scoped, it will be the core approved API API support. So we're not extending anything, nothing specific, no policies, things like that. We will add ingress support to it, so it'll be feature compatible. When we say feature compatible, we don't want to do the same kind of sins of the past with our current project. So it'll be a secure subset of the Ingress Nginx. So the idea is that we take what works, what's working well, what's good, and help us with the migration of that. So that's really this is, again, we talked about this in KubeCon Paris. We gave them an idea of what we want to do. We actually asked them for a project rename since we're going to start supporting Gateway API. We've got some ideas. I'm not going to drop the name because I want to save that for Salt Lake City. But we've discussed the name. We actually have come up with it. We're working on the new repo, and we're having a conversation now with you all and discussing it further in KubeCon Salt Lake City. So that's where we're at. That's what we wanted to discuss. So just wanted to bring that up to the group.
Yeah, thank you, James. I hope this is so. I've talked with James. I know some others have as well about this, and I think it's exciting because Ingress Nginx in particular is such a huge implementation. I appreciate everyone here who's helped maintain it over the years, and it's been a big gap that so many Kubernetes users use Ingress Nginx, and they don't have an easy way to use Gateway. So using the same implementation. So I think getting Gateway support is great. I do, part of the reason I wanted to have this discussion here is in the very early days of the project, maintainers, including myself, had said that there's not going to be a reference implementation of Gateway API. And as James said, this is not attempting to be a reference implementation of Gateway API. But it still would be a project inside Kubernetes SIGs that supports Gateway API. So I understand there could be some level of sensitivity there. But in my opinion, this is a net benefit overall.
Just don't call it Ingress Gateway.
Say it again. I didn't hear you, Flynn.
I said, just don't call it Ingress Gateway, right?
No.
Call it API Gateway. Just that.
Kubernetes API that'd be so much better. No, just call it Gateway. That's the right way to do it, right?
I think my favorite was Proxy McProxy Face from the community. So we were definitely not going with that one. But there were some good names coming from the community. But yeah, it is none of those that we've discussed.
Kubernetes default gateway. Yeah, I'm sure somebody suggested that.
Thanks for bringing this one up here. Doesn't look like we have any hands raised. We appreciate you communicating with us and letting us know. And excited to see your talk at KubeCon.
Yeah, maybe you should do a shameless plug for your talk at KubeCon.
Yeah, post a link to it.
Get heckled.
Not even shameless. Just,
I also have to explain Kubernetes networking in 30 minutes with Ricardo, so I'm gonna have a time.
Can you write a book about Kubernetes? Like,
I'm not saying it's a veiled attempt at promoting my book, but
fair.
Keith,
go ahead.
I'm not getting any money from that talk, just James.
Oh man, Ricardo, you have the best background. I don't know how I haven't noticed this yet, but
that is amazing. I want that background now. Again, appreciate y'all bringing this to the community. I guess I've got a couple of questions. One, what does this mean for the existing Ingress Nginx repo? And what's the recommendation for users of that? And then my second question is, who do you envision using the what's the persona? What's the user journey for the new Gateway API implementation of Ingress Nginx?
So we've been discussing a little bit. So we just released a very, I would say, restrictive version of 1.12 to help with some of the security issues. And I think we still haven't decided if that is our final release for it, besides patch fixes. and security issues if and when they do arise. So we're still working on understanding if this 112 is the last release for Ingress Nginx. And obviously, depending on the support that we receive from the community, maintainers and contributors, I'm thinking it's going to be around for at least the next 2 years. So we have a lot of time to discuss what is the ultimate migration path and what is the ultimate end to that project and that repo. So one of parts of the discussion were, do we just set a new V2 branch in Ingress Nginx and go from there? Or, it was brought up, I think maybe the first time I heard it was from Shane, of just let's start a new repo. There was lots of crazy ideas thrown out in all of these conversations. So ultimately, we will support Ingress. It will be up to the folks. We'll have this conversation as a community and understanding what folks would like to see. Right now, our thought is for at least for the next 2 years to continue to support it while we're implementing Gateway and Ingress. As far as the user journey, I think we have the reason why we have the survey out for Gateway API. We have the same problem. We don't know what folks are using. I'm gauging interest from, I think we had 3 issues asking for it. And the issue that I posted in there, we had about 24 to 30 people, giving us a thumbs up and commenting on it. So we do have to understand what that user journey looks like. So we'll be having that same conversation as probably any other gateway implementation. Fortunately, I work with one of them.
One thing I think what I'm hearing here is that at this point, Ingress Nginx would largely be in a feature freeze, and new work would be going to this new project primarily. Is that fair?
Yeah, and users are very used to this because when we first had that first major issue with the TLS certificates, we did a feature freeze to help harden some things. We added some new features that were security related. So I think it's not a new thing to folks using it since I think 1.7.
Cool. And one last question. This is much more theoretical. I'm not expecting an answer at this point, but if, for example, over the next 2 years is kind of the time frame I think you mentioned, Gateway API is able to provide a more seamless transition, like there's projects that Lior runs and others in the community, Ingress to Gateway. If there were a way to provide a seamless upgrade path from Ingress to Gateway API, would you consider this new project not supporting Ingress at all? No pressure to answer that.
No pressure. If there is a provided way to do that seamless migration, then that can be something. We don't fear doing deprecations, especially if it's the path that the SIG wants to go with. We have no issues. I think we just did a deprecation that did upset some folks, but if it's the way that we agree as a community as a whole to go with, then I'm fine with that. But very theoretical, and we'll continue to join these meetings and listen to those discussions. I think Marco had his hand up.
James, I have a Go ahead.
Oh.
Yeah, that's super important. Regarding the previous question, I just wanted to add. So I think having a feature freeze in Ingress Nginx totally makes sense. Also because in the past we received a lot of feature requests, which in the end were just resolved by adding yet another annotation and somehow opening up what you can configure on an Nginx in the end. We don't want this anymore. And so in the future, these requests should get directed to the new project. And also then, like right now, Ingress API does not cover all the features we could need maybe, but we also won't change Ingress API. And therefore, the new project probably is a way to check if, for example, Gateway API matches all the real world scenarios, and then think of a solution in Gateway API instead of just adding annotations again, which will in the end break the neck.
Yeah, no, I think that's a huge point. I hope that this can add some pressure on the project to on Gateway API itself to cover those use cases that users are really, we still have a bunch of low hanging fruit where there's we aren't supporting base features that a lot of users would benefit from.
Yeah, and I
don't think you have to hope that they're going to add pressure. I think it's a given that they will add pressure to do those things. Also, James, I have a bone to pick with you. Your talk is scheduled directly opposite mine.
Both of my talks are 20 minutes apart, so I'm going to have a very stressful afternoon on Thursday.
Oh man.
We are at 5 minutes.
One thing too is that we are going to continue to deprecate features. So we have a feature like TLS support that we want to help push users to this implementation. So deprecating these features while only making them available in the gateway the gateway implementation as a proper L7, then that's going to help grease the skids for people to migrate.
Yeah, I'm naming some of the features that we are planning to deprecate, like TLS pass-through, which doesn't work today. Finally, TCP, UDP, routing. So the idea is actually to have both ingress and at least the initial gateway implementation, I guess, as the layer 7, HTTP route, and then the TCP and UDP route being implemented as additional stuff.
Cool. Mattia, I think you're next.
Yeah, I do have a question that may be a little bit naive, but I am actually wondering why. I mean, what's the root reason to consider implementing the Gateway API? Because I am not fully aware of the original intent of engine ingress, but I guess that it has been kicked off as a reference implementation for the ingress API. And
but we never meant for it to be, so this was before I maintained it. We never meant for it to be considered a reference implementation for anyone. We don't want to, that's one of the things that we continue to not want to propagate in this new API, along with some of the security issues that we've had. So
sure thing. I mean, this is a very honest question. I mean, I am not at all against this the Gateway API implementation by Ingress and Nginx. It's just real curiosity. Why implementing the Gateway API alongside the Ingress API? I mean, what's the root reason for that?
We went back and forth on supporting Ingress as well. I think the idea was around just being able to help the migration, because we do have, it's I think it's 7-8-year-old project that has a lot of technical debt and a lot of security debt around it. So we want to have a fresh look at and separating wholly, because we do a lot in the Ingress API in Ingress Nginx that we shouldn't. We expose a lot, and it has caused us issues in the past. So we're trying to clean that up as well. So, and as Rob said, if we have a clear path forward, eventually we can deprecate it. So lots of conversations. We have lots of hands up too. I don't know who was first, Antonio or Rob.
Yeah, I think I was first, but Antonio, I've talked more. So Antonio, you should go.
What I intend to say is that as today, as a user, because I was spending a lot of time in understanding this problem, is Gateway is not a replacement of things. As a user, not as a SIG network or whatever, I try to do the same things that I do with Ingress with Gateway, and I could. So I find that I don't know what is the goal of this project or not, but if the goal is to replace Ingress right now, the feedback that I have and my proper experience is that I can.
You're completely right. You cannot presently replace. There are table stakes features for north-south traffic that Gateway API does not implement yet, and that is a thing that is being actively worked on. I would expect, although I'm not part of the Ingress Nginx folks, I would expect that they are planning to push the Gateway API to support those things over time. And also, you heard James say that they're expecting the Ingress support to be maintained for another couple of years at least, which I think is critical, honestly.
Yeah, it will be slowly like closed down, like just patch fixes, new Alpine images and things like that.
Yeah, I think what I would say here is if we can somehow, and this is not something we can do on this call since we're at time, but if there's some path forward we can chart where 2 years from now, we have everything we need in Gateway API, so much so that even the legacy support for Ingress is not needed at that point, or yeah, I don't know, pick at some point in the future, what are the things that we need to cover in Gateway API that are not covered in Gateway API that would make it possible for this new project not to support Ingress at all. Basically, that feels like a discussion worth having.
I would really like for that to be less than 2 years out. Just saying.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah, me too. I'm maintaining 2 projects. So one is hard enough.
Yeah, I hear you.
To reiterate what Shane is saying in the chat, there are no plans to deprecate the Ingress API.
No, but that's not on. That's the project guideline. Once the API is there, it's there forever. So it's a wider discussion with SIG architect, not even.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think it's the same thing. Sorry, go ahead. You've got your hand.
Yeah. To me, this is just a big chance to slowly and gently getting the community of Ingress Nginx, which is used to Ingress API, migrated to Gateway API, reevaluate all their requests in a timely manner and in a way that has been planned beforehand. Because right now, in the past years, I think we got pull requests and they got accepted, and so Ingress Nginx went in a way it should not have been. And right now, we just start from scratch and try to reevaluate. And so having Ingress API support, even if it's just a script or whatnot that's converting your Ingress resources to what it being Gateway API, is just a gentle way of supporting or of migrating the community over to Gateway API. We're not telling that we want to implement all the features we have in Ingress Nginx. In the end, it should only be a way to tell users, okay, come over here, here's some migration script, whatnot, Ingress API, backwards compatibility support, but on the long run, we'll definitely go to Gateway API. And so it's just attracting users for Gateway API.
Yeah, no, I think that is a great note to end on. We're past time. Thank you everyone from Ingress Nginx community for joining this call. It's been a great discussion. I look forward to talking more at KubeCon, but this has been great. Thank you everyone.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah. Have a great one.
Looking forward to seeing you all in the same time zone.
Likewise.
And a cold time zone.
Yeah, next week.
Yeah.
Oh, it's not going to be that cold, relatively speaking.
Oh, it's going to be cold for me because during the days it's currently like 24 to 30 degrees Celsius in Sydney. So.
Oh dear God!
It's going to be a big change.
Yeah, single digits.
Woo! Good luck with that. See you all next week.
See you all next week.
Bye.